Alrighty. I hope everyone rested a bit on their break and were able to digest or process a little bit of the information and the conversation we had during the first part of the workshop. Just coming back from the break, I have two little scenarios I want to go through with everybody about bystander intervention. And the first one, I want to ask everyone, so imagine that you're in a meeting, in an online meeting, and I'm sorry, I will get rid of I see a comment that says the box is covering my slides again. I apologize. It's hard to manage all of these windows on just a small laptop screen. Back to the scenario at hand. I want to ask everyone here to imagine that you're in a meeting and you see or you perceive one of the other participants speaking over others that are trying to comment, or maybe they've interrupted the primary speaker. It's not just once, it's been happening the whole meeting, right? Someone who's really excited about the material, or they just keep kind of drawing the conversation back to questions they have. So what are some possible ambiguities in the scenario? And, using one of the 5 Ds or some of the strategies that we discussed, how could you intervene in a way that respects all parties? And I encourage you to post your thoughts in the chat window. And if you have any questions about the 5 Ds, okay, the 5 Ds, I will go back. Oops, sorry, I'm the wrong way. Forgive the rapid scrolling. It's just easier to search this way. Here we are. The 5 Ds: direct, distract, delegate, delay, or document. So there's a question about an ambiguity, is that do they have a longer latency so they start speaking before hearing someone else? And in this scenario, I kind of want you to imagine like someone who's imagine someone starts speaking and then someone speaks over them, or imagine there's a lot of chatter but someone just raises their voice over everyone else in the meeting and turns the attention to them. So in this scenario, I want you to imagine like someone's just kind of keeping all the space to speak to themselves. And is there an ambiguity? Are they hard of hearing, right? Ambiguity. What is the cause of the overspeaking? What are the power dynamics? Is this person who keeps speaking up the chair, right? And all of these things will affect the situation. But in this case, and I left it open-ended so we can just kind of work quickly through the process of what that looks like, right? Maybe this person is hard of hearing and they don't understand or they don't perceive other people speaking when they're speaking over them. And what are the power dynamics? But with all of these ambiguities in place, what's something that you can do to clear them up? Or how can we use the 5 Ds in a way that can compensate for these ambiguities? So someone mentioned, instead of having people speak freely, maybe consider having them raise their hands, right? So as maybe the meeting manager or the moderator is given power to take control of the situation, right? They could be the ones to respectfully say, anyone who wants to make a comment, and then they try to manage the participants from that perspective, right? And we have a lot of practice for the last 1.5 years doing that as well, right? Is this a video conference and there's an audio delay? That, in this case, let's imagine it is a video conference. And if there is a delay, how do you address that, right? Because even with all of these ambiguities, the situation is still happening, right? This person may not be intending to interrupt or to speak over everyone, but they are doing it, right? So even if they don't intend to be disrupting the meeting, they are. So There's a few more comments. There's someone mentioned having a direct intervention right in the chat, or if it's a chaos of voices. I couldn't hear X just now as Y was speaking at the same time. That's a very clear, respectful way to say it. Just draw attention to the person who wanted to speak, make space for them, and just remind the person Y, in this case, the person who's interrupting, that they were speaking over them. Simply say something to the effect of, let's let the speaker finish before anyone else speaks up, or write them privately for more directness, right? These are all very good examples. Have the moderator recognize speakers. That was also something we talked about. And I mean, none of these things necessarily require someone standing up and say, you there, be quiet, let someone else speak, right? And this is a small one-time interaction, but, you know, just addressing it quickly and respectfully can just bring that meeting right on track. So someone else mentioned afterward, we should probably see how the person being interrupted reacted to the situation and if it has been recurring. And that's a very good point, right? Check in, because sometimes people can feel like, or maybe even be stepped on in a way, right? That they don't feel that they have the respect or the power or the privilege in the organization to speak up. I have another scenario, and this one I clarify that it is an online meeting, Zoom or Blue Jeans or whatever interface you're using. So before this meeting gets started, some of the participants have signed on, they're laughing and talking casually. One of the participants makes a comment and another person stops laughing and looks angry. They call out, "That was rude. Who are you to say things like that?" Everyone kind of looks uncomfortable. The participant that made the original comment gets quiet, and they don't participate for the rest of the meeting. And they don't come to the next one either. So what are some possible ambiguities in this situation? And is there a better way to address was there a better way to handle this situation? Using any of the strategies we discussed, what is a better way to address the comment? So while we're thinking about this second scenario, I want to address another comment I have in the chat, is that in some cultures, people do speak all at the same time, and that's felt as supporting. It might be useful to remind that cultures are different, and in interacting with other cultures, they might be more careful not to speak at the same time. And that's a good point. And, you know, despite everyone's personal culture or upbringing or things like that, we all do agree, just like we agreed to the meeting code of conduct when registering for the Reuben workshop. When we're in a meeting, it's up to the moderator, it's up to the group as a collective to establish the meeting culture that we're going to participate in, right? And that's why it's very, very important to be clear about the meeting culture, even if you have to remind everyone of it before every meeting. It's useful, right? Does anyone have any thoughts about scenario number 2 before moving on? Oh, I see one. There's a comment that says, the angry participant may have misinterpreted the comment. It may have just been an attempt to join the casual talk, right? And that's a good point, right? Maybe the angry participant, they misinterpreted the intent. But in this case, you know, we remind ourselves that the intent doesn't equal the impact. Now, nothing the person who made the comment that offended the angry person, they probably had no intention of being like that or having that reaction, but it doesn't matter because it did. So you have to try to understand both feelings. So someone says that it might be useful to contact the person and ask for an explanation in a diplomatic way. And then someone else replied to that, I think that can sound condescending unless you're from the same culture. So another comment is that in this situation, I would probably try to change the subject and be direct privately to avoid the parent forward outcome, right? So this is to just as a moderator of that meeting, you could say, if you draw any attention to it at all, just say, let's just ouch, oops, move on for that time, but then reach out to each person privately and say, I'm sorry you were upset, what happened, or, reach out to the person who made the comment and, you're not asking them what was going through their minds or anything like that. You just want to say, I think you upset the other person. How can we all proceed to make this right? So there's another comment. Given the strategies presented, participants 1, apologize. Participant 2, try to address the comment, not the person. The meeting chair, question mark. So there's a little bit of discussion going on in the chat. How do you give feedback without being condescending? Addressing the comment, but then it's connected to the person, right? We're trying to understand how both people feel, right? We don't necessarily know what the comment was. We don't know. It seems like the group of people in this scenario kind of thought it was a funny comment, and one person was affected by it. We don't know why that person was affected by it. It could have been alluding to a personal experience they had, or it could have been, just something that resonated with them that just struck them the wrong way. So it doesn't matter what the comment was. It matters that that person was affected. It matters that this person still needs to continue working with the person who made the comment. And it matters that we acknowledge their feelings. We acknowledge that the person who made the comment made a mistake, and we try to help them apologize professionally and respectfully to the other person. And we are there for the person who was offended. So there's another comment. I think you can always say something like, I hope you don't take offense at my raising this, to not sound condescending. How do we not sound condescending? How do we not project something onto some other person? That's where we use I statements, right? That's why we say, I see how you reacted and you looked really upset, and I'm sorry. You don't need to tell me why you were upset, but I see that you were upset, and I want to try to understand if we can make this better, if this was ongoing behavior. That's how you open up that conversation. And somebody asked, what if the comment was truly rude? Did the angry participant react appropriately then? And it's not about whether they acted appropriately or inappropriately, right? Because sometimes when emotions are high, when that comment may have just really hurt the person's feelings, yeah, they were justified in reacting the way they did. But how do we try to address the situation so we can either just maintain the working relationship and try to make it not a positive experience, but build onto it positively, right? So it is absolutely okay that this person was upset. We are not trying to minimize the person being upset. And we're not trying to minimize the person who accidentally made the comment. We're trying to address it respectfully, and we're trying to maintain a positive relationship between the commenter and the person who was offended, right? And if it's not reparable, at least, keep it professional. And this is why, as an ally, you might try to work on helping the person who made the comment learn how to apologize, or, listen to how they feel, right? Because if that person didn't intend to offend anyone, they may just be mortified and be taken aback by the fact that someone reacted so strongly to a comment they made. So there's a lot of chat going on about this, and I really appreciate everyone's comments. The problem of this is like when receiving emails, how words are perceived depend on the person receiving them, right? That's very, very true, okay? Intent, your intent does not equal the impact of your actions or words. So the same goes with interventions. What sounds condescending to one person does not to another. When different cultures are there, it is difficult to have a perception common ground. There's another comment here. Advice on the bystanders in this scenario. Distraction would be the easy one, but may not prevent both from showing up again, right? So distraction in this case is distraction or delaying. Doesn't mean that you are ignoring the problem. It just means you're covering, you're taking attention away from it at that moment, right? You're giving people space to feel what they feel, and then you're reaching out to them in a way that afterwards, where they can feel more open to express themselves, where they won't involve other bystanders or make other people uncomfortable. We're not trying to silence anybody, but for the sake of everyone else's perception and to work on these relationships, taking it offline can really be the better solution in a situation, right? So I'm going to have to move on so I can get next to the part two of this workshop. Thank you so much for everybody for making the comments and thinking about these scenarios. It was really interesting to have this discussion. So right now I'm going to start part 2 of this workshop, right? How to navigate the conflict zone and be an ally. So this material was adapted from the See Different toolkit that was assembled by the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. And I want to start off with an activity, and this activity is called the conflict spectrum. So this activity helps identify how you approach conflict. The objective is to understand the different approaches to conflict and the various types of triggers that push us to exercise them. So I have 3 little scenarios here. You can pick one or you can answer for all of them. But I want you to think about one of these scenarios and how you would react to it, how you would try to deal with it. And the first scenario is that you're frustrated because a coworker in another time zone keeps sending urgent requests outside of your local working hours. How do you approach this? What if it keeps happening? What if you got a promotion or a project lead or an advantage that a friend at work wanted as well? And now things are uncomfortable between you two. The third scenario, your office mate has a very different ideology than you do and constantly talks about it. They dismiss other ways of thinking and throw the word idiot around a lot. So pick which one that kind of resonates with you. And I'm just curious to see what are some responses to how people will deal with one of these scenarios. And so, you know, on this conflict spectrum, the aggressive reaction or an aggressive way of dealing with it is kind of like a direct confrontation, right? You might have a verbal argument with that person. And then as the spectrum slides to the right, you get more into the civil dialogue where you try to bring it up respectfully, where you try to give them space to express their feelings and to express their perceptions of the situation. But then the scale slides further to the right and you get into the avoidance category where you just don't do anything about the problem. So if you have a specific conflict or a specific scenario that you want to address, just put the number next to it and maybe reply about how you'd want to deal with it or how you think you'd deal with it. So I've got some responses for the first scenario. Someone says, I'm going to say I'm sorry, but remind them that it's outside of my working hours. Another person responded, don't look at my email. Suggest that they use a program that can schedule a message to be sent only during the working hours. Some person said for scenario number 3, I've been close to it some years ago. I responded with avoiding that office mate that has the different ideology with me to the point that it was rude. And in retrospect, my behavior was discriminatory. Thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting to think about, right? Someone else has a comment about scenario number 1, and they said, I think setting boundaries is important and mentioning it is important, right? No one is going to know what your boundaries are unless you make it clear that they're outside of working hours, right? So, I mean, if this hasn't been made clear, maybe that's the reason it keeps happening. So someone sent me a direct message about number 3, and I'd like to read it out to everybody. I find that my ability to believe that people with ideological differences can be reasoned with, or indeed that they're acting in good faith, has decreased radically since 2016, and especially post-COVID. And honestly, I try to get assigned a different office or office mate. And that's a good point, right? And we're not able to go into the, current cultural climate, but it does feel a lot more radicalized. And in this case, that you don't feel that direct confrontation in any, either whether it's aggressive or even a civil dialogue will help, then that is a very appropriate response. That if you feel that you cannot have a working relationship or share space with this person, then do the healthy thing and remove yourself from the situation if you can, or find an ally to help you find help, right? Someone mentioned that scenario number 1 deserves a civil dialogue, especially if it keeps happening, to let the coworker know what hours you're available and respond during those times. Someone said that the second scenario is just difficult, and I agree, it really is, right? How to manage those things among friends. Someone mentioned that number 3, I try to display empathy by presenting possible reasons people might have other ideologies in the hopes of showing different perspectives. But to be honest, I really struggle with this, right? And sometimes I certainly do too, right? There are comments that are addressing other comments that were made. You shouldn't be too hard on yourself. You were doing the best you can under circumstances, right? In response to dealing with, this office mate who has a different ideology. It's difficult with power differentials. It's hard to ignore your boss or your PhD advisor, for example. But there's a lot more comments about number 1 and number 3. And I really appreciate everyone commenting. I am going to have to move on, but feel free to read through the chat and understand these responses. Like they're, it's about setting boundaries. It's about, in scenario number 1, and for number 3, it's tough, but it's really important to try to understand people who see things differently, right? And sometimes when it's just too much, that's when it's important to have an ally. That's when it's important to have those reporting structures you can rely on, so you can say, this person may still continue to work here, but I cannot do my work with them. So I want to ask, why do we have different approaches to conflict? Have you ever judged someone based on how they react to conflict? And of course, how do power and privilege impact our approach to conflict? I want everyone to keep these questions in mind, and feel free to respond to them in the chat. So I want to break down the spectrum and just highlight a few approaches to conflict. They include avoidance, which is just denying the problem, pretending there's nothing wrong. Sometimes people do that just to preserve their own mental health, just to say that I can't deal with this right now, I'm walking away, right? And it could be good for the short term, but for the long term, it's emotionally draining, right? Accommodating, also giving in to another person's point of view, paying attention to their concerns, not your own, that's great. But also for sustaining long-term, difficult. Problem solving, of course, is finding a solution that makes everyone happy, or compromising. And of course, competing, right? This more aggressive nature, getting what you want no matter what. Some win and some lose. So what's the right way? There's not a right or a wrong way necessarily, and it has a lot to do with risk assessment. It has a lot to do with power and privilege in the office or in the work group. But we have to keep in mind to try to restrain or refrain from judging others when they use approaches that you don't agree with. Because again, there's a reason, there's a lot of things that are governing their decision making, right? And the important thing is to focus on your strategies. What is a way that you can do that is the best for your mental health? Sometimes you need to find a short-term solution, but then when you go back, it might not be sustainable. So you need to, and that's where allyship is very important, right? To have somebody, know somebody is supporting you when you're trying to deal with conflict is very important. So we've been taught, this has come up in the first hour of this workshop, and now this concept of cross-cultural communication, right? Different cultures have different forms of communicating and different forms of approaching conflict. So we need to try to understand that these different elements, such as body language or facial expressions and eye contact, do not exhibit universal meaning. So typically for this workshop, I would give all the participants like a little quiz of facts to answer, but just for the to cover everything on time, I simply just created a bullet list of some facts that I want to point out, differences in cultures. But, you know, so of course, in most cultures, touch like handshake or hugs symbolizes emotion and relationships. Latin America, Southern and Eastern Europe, and the Middle East are all high touch cultures, meaning this is a way of communicating, symbolizing relationships much more, handshakes and hugs especially. Of course, we might all know this, but some gestures that are considered humorous in some cultures are considered offensive in others. A collectivist culture is one where in which it values the community as a group over the individual, right? So the open expression of individual emotion is often discouraged as a way to build trust within a group. And that's in regards to a collectivist culture, right? Can anyone think of some examples or some countries that kind of exhibit more collectivist cultures? If you have any thoughts, you can put them in the chat. Someone mentioned, yeah, Japan. That's a good example. And sometimes some of the Scandinavian countries also exhibit collectivist cultures. But the most important thing I want to point out here in just these little fast facts is that the lack of cultural competence has been a factor in the failure of international business deals, right? Someone negotiating things between two or multiple cultures, the fact that they weren't educated in the different, even the different mannerisms of cultures, or even how to work within a multicultural working group, someone without these skills developed have been a factor in the failure of huge business deals, right? So I don't have any specific examples, but in this in this case, when it comes to like multinational global conglomerates, right? Navigating these cultural differences is very, very important, especially in conducting international business. So I want to ask participants, can you recall a time where you have experienced a misunderstanding because of a difference in cross-cultural communication? And I want to ask as well why you think this is an important skill in inclusive leadership, besides the example I just gave, that it has a lack of these skills have contributed to deals falling through. Someone mentioned back in 1997, when IBM sent me to Taiwan for work, they gave me training on the culture before I went. And that's interesting, and that's kind of a proactive workplace, right? Because I mean, it's going to be different when you get there, and you as a representative of that company should know or should try to understand how to navigate those situations. There's a comment too about the high contact cultures. So high contact cultures should never be an excuse for inappropriate physical behavior. It is though, and often. That's a very interesting point, right? And I totally agree with your statement. And that's where it gets really sticky to navigate as well, right? Because, for instance, in Chile, the especially pre-COVID, right, the common greeting for a lot of people, between men and women or between women and women was to touch their right cheek to the other person. And I was not used to having to do this when I got here. I was very uncomfortable with it at first, but I didn't want to offend anybody. So I had to kind of do a lot of work to get used to that gesture. And I understand that while it was strange to me, it was just a part of what I was expected to participate in, right? And there were, and I imagine some people who come here to work, some people who just really aren't comfortable with touch really have to struggle, or may even have to set a boundary that says, I don't feel comfortable touching your cheek like this, but a handshake, or just to, try to respectfully deny the contact and then, navigate that brief awkward situation. So the other comments, there's one that says misunderstanding can lead to conflict, and conflict to bullying. In international collaboration, it is important to prevent bullying. That's very true. So thank you for pointing that out. Another comment that says, when I was then in Taiwan, I did have a misunderstanding because right after lunch, everyone took a 10-minute nap at their desk, and didn't get why everyone turned up late to meetings scheduled immediately after lunch. The training didn't tell me that. So that's a good point, right? There's some things that we have to kind of be flexible with when we're experiencing new cultures. And the way we might do something like that, or the way we might think about something like that, is imagine that you're being invited over to a colleague's house for dinner one day, and you want to get to know them, or you want to just build a better working relationship, so you accept. So when you go to their home, you do as they do, right? If they don't like shoes in the house, you might, you'll be willing to accept your mistake if you wear shoes in the house, but then, for everyone's benefit, take off your shoes. Or then during dinner, you may not eat with the same manners you generally eat with in your own home. But when you go to your colleague's house, you don't necessarily know how it works completely and thoroughly at their home. But we try to be flexible so we can understand these little slights and move on with them, because there's a bit of an understanding here. You are trying to change your behaviors for the sake of being respectful in their home. But they need to be more flexible to say that, mistakes can happen, and it's okay if you make one, right? So I'm going to address some comments I see in the chat. Someone said, also, in high contact culture, there are clear boundaries. You don't touch or kiss everybody, so it is legitimate to ask respect for boundaries. Someone else mentioned that they don't like to be touched in general, especially the cheek-to-cheek greeting. It makes me very uncomfortable. How can I set a boundary without offending people? So there's a way, sometimes we might accept that it might be awkward for somebody. And I do remember that one time when I didn't understand the cheek-to-cheek greeting very well. It's just a cheek touch. It's not a kiss. I just put on some chapstick, and I met somebody who was showing me an apartment, And I gave them a kiss on their cheek, and I left this biggest smudge of chapstick on their cheek. And they were just like, ew, gross. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm new to this. It was awkward, but that's how we all learn how to apologize. That's just how we try to, we have to govern our own personal space, and we have to own that it may make other people uncomfortable. So collectively, between ourselves, we can understand how to own our boundaries, and we can understand how to apologize professionally, how to apologize politely and say, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with that, right? And flex as much as we are comfortable with doing. So people who come from high contact cultures, someone mentioned that they're not comfortable with all the touching. People find it odd, but are often very accommodating about my wishes. It's okay to tell people how you feel about it. Someone else mentioned an example of misunderstanding. I was a guest of a friend in India. I said thank you a lot over the course of 2 weeks. At the end, they told me that was acting like we weren't like friends. Since hospitality was a given, it didn't need to be thanked. So that's a very good point. And everybody's been making some great comments. I really appreciate it. And so, yeah, we'll make mistakes in trying to understand these different cultures, right? Apologizing appropriately and being forgiving are two very important ways to mitigate some of these cross-cultural communication mistakes. How are some other ways that you can mitigate these things? Listening carefully, using nonverbal communication such as affirmation or anything when you don't, minus hand signals. Hand signals can be tricky. Trying to understand how the other person feels, repeating what has been said or clarifying, asking open-ended questions when it's about a communication issue, not just a greeting, and of course using I statements, right? Owning your boundaries, owning your experience. So we're going to get in now finally to the meat of this workshop, and we're going to talk about what an ally really is. And I'm going to show this just 3-minute video. Please, please, please tell me if you can't hear the sound. I know I engaged it properly when I did the share screen option, but if it doesn't come through, please let me know in the chat window.
Hey friends! So I'm trying something different with my setup, and I don't know if it's working, but you will deal. Imagine your friend is building a house and they ask you to help, but you've never built a house before. So it'd probably be a good idea for you to put on some protective gear and listen to the person in charge, otherwise someone's gonna get seriously hurt. Look, I'm helping! It's the exact same idea when it comes to being an ally. An ally is a person that wants to fight for the equality of a marginalized group that they're not a part of. We need your help building this house, but you probably should listen so you know what to do first. Let's do this. So here are my 5 tips for being a good ally. Understand your privilege. Now, a lot of people get hung up on the word privilege, so let me break it down for you nice and easy. Privilege does not mean that you are rich, that you've had an easy life, that everything's been handed to you and you've never had to struggle or work hard. All it means is that there are some things in life that you will not experience or ever have to think about just because of who you are. It's kind of like those horses that have those blinders on. They can see just fine. There's just a whole bunch of stuff on the side that they don't even know exists. So for example, there are currently 29 states where you can legally be fired for being gay, and there are 34 states where you can legally be fired for being trans. Now, as a straight cis woman, those are things that I don't have to ever think about if I don't want to. I'm not gonna be fired because I'm straight, and I'm not gonna be fired because I am cis. So it makes sense that before I can fight for the rights of others, I have to understand what rights I have and others don't. That's privilege. Listen and do your homework. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's not possible for you to learn if you aren't willing to listen. So you gotta know when to zippa the lippa. I don't know. You get what I mean. But that's the thing that's so cool about social media. There are so many people sharing their stories all around the world and connecting with people that they normally would never get a chance to without the power of the internet. So do your homework. Start reading blogs, tweets, news articles, and stories so that you can get caught up on the issues that are important to the communities that you want to support. Speak up, but not over. If the Fight for Equality was a girl group, the ally wouldn't be the lead singer or the second lead singer. They'd be Michelle. An ally's job is to support. You want to make sure that you use your privilege and your voice to educate others, but make sure to do it in such a way that does not speak over the community members that you're trying to support or take credit for things that they are already saying. This isn't Mario Kart. Stay in your lane. Realize that you're going to make mistakes and apologize when you do. Nobody's perfect. Unlearning problematic things takes time and work, so you are bound to mess up and trip and fall. But don't worry, you can brush yourself off and get right back up. And back up! Just remember that it's not about your intent, it's about your impact. So when you get called out, make sure to listen, apologize, commit to changing your behavior, and move forward. Last but certainly not least, actually the most important thing on this list, is remember that ally is a verb. Saying you're an ally is not enough. You gotta do the work. 1 through 4. 1 through 4. As always, there are links in the video description box to some of the things I mentioned in this video, along with some resources that have been really helpful for me as I've gone along in my journey to be more conscious. So I want to hear from you in the comments. What are some sites that you suggest checking out, and what are some things that have helped you become a better ally? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye!
I'm Richard Branson, and
Sorry about that. The autoplay of the following videos. I have included a link to this YouTube video, so you can read through the comments and see and get a link to her channel. So all of that information will be shared as we finish this workshop, so don't worry. I want to open up the floor and I want to ask, what is an ally to you? Or can you think of a time when an ally stood up for you? What did that feel like? What impact can they have on an individual, on a community? I want everyone to think about these questions so we can really try to start working together to understand all of the different ways you or anyone else can be an ally. Post your thoughts, post your comments in the chat. I am going to move on just so I can cover some of the more of the information, but I will address your comments. So the last activity, how to be an ally. I'm going to be emphasizing a lot of the things that she said in the video, right? But the first thing that I need to mention is to be an ally. To ally is a verb. It's an action. You're not just an ally. You are allying yourself with a group or another person. So we want to be sure that allyship is understood and practiced well. So, because if not, someone with good intentions may do more harm than good, right? And we're going to talk about how you are an ally, how you work to be an ally, right? So I see this question, are the Reuben allies trained and by whom? And so there's not necessarily this, there are specific trainings to be an ombuds person or how to listen, things like that. But to be a good ally is not necessarily to check off these training programs. To be a good ally is you doing a lot of the work yourself to learn about other cultures, histories, or struggle of the people you want to ally with, right? And a lot of that work comes from, doing well-rounded research on their own, really trying to understand the work culture they want to improve, really understanding the people they want to help, right? That's the work of being an ally, not just taking a class. And that's where, in the video, we learned how we can make mistakes. We can misunderstand something, or we might speak over someone with good intentions. That's where we all have to learn how to apologize and how to move on, how to change our behaviors, right? Other ways of being an ally are making friends with people from other groups. And this means other working groups or, making friends with people who are outside of your, comfort friends group. This is about bystander intervention, taking a stand when a person faces unjust treatment. And remember that choosing to stand up is a privilege, right? There are people who are oppressed or who are consistently treated unfairly who can't take a break from this experience. So you bring a different perspective to that situation, leverage it to support those whose voices aren't being heard, and help bring isolated or marginalized people into the center. I don't mean to say that in a way that you're putting the spotlight on them, that you're drawing attention to them, but you're offering that lifeline. You're offering, hey, I will help support you. I will just, add to your group. I will, be a friend. So when people become isolated, they usually need help being connected to the larger community, right? Especially when they're starting with a new group or a new employee or a new hire, anything like that. We can try to help build opportunities for these people, or maybe a small isolated group, to engage with others, right? If you are a leader of a working group or a leader, a manager and within the project, or in any of your in whatever world that you're thinking of right now, if you can, try to promote leadership opportunities for people who traditionally don't occupy leadership roles, right? And this is mentoring and encouragement. Can you train others to become allies? Well, yes, you can. This presentation I made from other facilitated resources, right? These workshops were designed and were meant for us to understand them, to work through them with our groups, because they're very personal. We're sharing these experiences that we have. We're sharing all of these ideas that we have. And so we have this framework of what an ally is and what bystander intervention looks like, but how they're acted out and how they're gone through needs to be adapted for every working group. So even if you don't have an official training about, have you completed, 6 or 8 or 10 coursework hours, these are supposed to be ways that you work through together, right? That's how you are an ally. You're helping other people understand how they can be allies. So I see this comment here that says, if allies are not trained or not by classes only, how can the targets trust them? I'm going to give a counterexample. And so, just because you have completed a degree in physics doesn't necessarily make you a complete expert on, nuclear physics, for example, or it doesn't make you prepared to go into a working group and to immediately know how to do the research. Do you know where that comes from? It comes from experience. It comes from experience of doing, right? And this is a lot that comes up during hiring, is that, is it their degree that matters as much as their work experience, as much as their proven records of demonstrating allyship, of demonstrating how they can be a resource? And someone mentioned to counter that comment, sometimes even formal training doesn't make someone a good ally. Unfortunately, it's a long process to build trust. And that's absolutely true, right? It takes work. You have to put yourself over and over again as somebody who can, who's willing to ally yourself with that group that you want to help, or ally yourself with the workplace, with people in the workplace, and say, I want to help make a better workplace culture. I've been doing this for 6 years, and I am not even remotely close to being perfect. I'm not a social worker. I don't have all these solutions to all these problems, But I want to do these things. I want to have these workshops. I want to have these discussions, because if I reach those people who are in this, are in these places of privilege, I want to be someone who can just help someone navigate these things, right? I'm using a position of privilege because I'm given a platform to speak out, right? To speak out on these basic things, right? And I try to do that over and over again, even if it doesn't make, just this big impactful change. I'm trying my best to chip away at this. And that's what everybody who's doing this work is doing, right? So someone said, we started the discussion by saying that interventions could be negative, and we had suggestions not to be negative. The problem is the targets go through such difficulties, and the consequences of interacting with an ally who is not experienced or good can be large for the target. What does Reuben do to protect the targets from this? Well, if a person needs to talk to someone, this is another comment, that they're going to talk to a person that they trust and feel more comfortable with, even if there is an official ally group. So everyone needs to learn how to be an ally. Another comment is that one interesting aspect is also the culture knowledge that is not always taught in the training. As mentioned before, right? That example where someone went to Taiwan and they didn't understand about making meetings right after lunch. So training is good, but I don't think it's sufficient to build trust. And that's right. You didn't come into this meeting, you're not going to instantly trust me. I'm going to present this information to you. We're going to read and break it apart and discuss it together. But we're all thinking of little things that we can do, right? We're all thinking of things that, we can work on. And sometimes it's just being there to listen. Trust in people's experiences and listen, right? Don't interrogate their experiences in order to convince yourself that it was real or not. And one of the big things of that is asking this person, are you sure they were discriminating against you because of your race or gender? Maybe they were just being rude, right? You are there to listen to your experiences. You do not need to interpret them. And of course, one easy thing that all allies can do, respect spaces that are designated for equity-seeking groups, right? Recognize and respect that equity-seeking groups like women in astronomy or, Latino men in astronomy, all of these things, these groups need to build relationships. They want to build relationships with others that have similar life experiences, right? So if you don't do anything else, respect those spaces. So I have 3 scenarios to pose to the audience before wrapping up. And so there's this one last comment, and I think it's a really good point. It says, I think ally is what someone else says about you, and that self-labeling isn't that important. And that's very true. And someone else commented, yes, exactly. I personally don't feel that we call ourselves allies. That's what other people call us if we're actually being allies. And that's very true, right? I try to ally myself with people I work with and try to understand workplace culture. The Reuben workplace culture advocates try to do this, but we need to demonstrate work. We need to demonstrate our commitment to it. And everybody, you don't proclaim yourself an ally and say, boom, I'm an ally. You practice it. You model the behaviors of an ally, right? It is a verb, not a noun. So we have 5 minutes left. I just want to ask these 2 scenarios, or sorry, these 3 scenarios if we get to them. So you have a friend at work that frequently complains to you about a colleague leaving work to take care of their kids or to deal with family issues. You know that your friend only complains to you. They don't say anything to your coworker's face, so you don't bother confronting them about it. Are you being an ally? Why or why not? If you are not being an ally, what strategies can you use to become an ally? Someone responded that you're not helping. No, in this situation, you're not being an ally. You're, someone else said that you are being an ally just by listening, right? But imagine the person who's, leaving work frequently to take care of their kids or deal with family issues. But, instead of you're allowing your friend to make negative comments about this person. And, yes, you're hearing your friend vent, but you're also kind of letting them keep you're letting them continue kind of a toxic behavior. So if you want to be an ally to both your friend and that person who's dealing with family issues, this is where you could intervene with friends. You could try to talk to them and understand about, why do they keep complaining, right? What would they do if they had that situation, right? A lot of us may have family issues come up at work, and it just happens. We're human beings, right? Someone mentioned it's still worth confronting them about it. You want to support the work culture that should support workers with family obligations. And that's a very good point, right? You want to help be a part of the culture. So even though you have to confront your friend about it, you're doing them a service. You're doing them a solid, because you want to help them understand that it is better to model better to be a part of a workplace that supports, having families and acknowledging that it's tough. And then, using your privilege as being their friend to have that communication with them. So someone mentions you're not being an ally. I would ask my friend why it bothers them, have a conversation about it. Maybe they're not thinking things through. And another person said, I think you should try to make your friend realize that there's another side to this that they're overlooking. They may be in the same situations, themselves. So negative comments can lead to negative interactions, even unconsciously. So it's important to address this with a friend, right? It's very, yeah, and that's a very good point, especially this unconscious part, right? We don't want it to become a bigger problem in the future. So early intervention is appropriate. And someone mentioned as an icebreaker to discuss rather than confronting the friend for poor attitude or similar, right? And the last scenario I want us to go through, I'll point it out for you and then I'll wrap up while we're thinking about it. So Mark complains that the universe, and Mark is a made up name. I'm sorry if you know someone named Mark, it's not anyone specific. Mark complains that university admissions are tougher because there are more immigrants. Post-secondary is more competitive. Immigrants are taking all the spots. He concludes that immigrants are making it harder for people who have lived here for generations. And then Maria says, Mark, stop complaining. Just accept this new reality. Life is more competitive now with more immigrants, but that's not their fault. It's the government's fault for accepting so many, even though there's no jobs. But Maria says, you can't blame them for wanting to go higher education. Is Maria an ally? Why or why not? So we only have a minute left, and I'm sorry for not managing time appropriately. There was just so much rich discussion, and I wanted to get to everyone's comments. But just to wrap up, I want to mention just a few things. Remind everybody there are many approaches to conflict. Intervening in a problem or communication error is an important part of allyship. Allyship is an effective way of supporting those involved in exclusionary conflict, right? And I really want to emphasize that to be an ally, to work to be an ally is a process. You're going to make mistakes. You might not understand everything, but it takes work. And so in we can continue this discussion in the Slack channel. I highly encourage it. If you have any ideas or thoughts you'd like to bring up with regards to this workshop, I really want to thank everybody for spending their time, spending 2 hours of their time or 1 hour of their time with me. And I really appreciate all the comments and the rich discussion that we've had. I'm more than happy to keep it going on the Slack channel during the rest of this conference. And I thank everybody again for coming. Just on the way out for scenario 2, the answer for the concept that Maria is not an ally, she's a flawed ally, is because she's, she's not listening, she's not helping problem solve. She isn't an ally because she's creating this kind of, she's not shifting the blame, right? She's still upholding this kind of negative view of immigrants, right? That they're coming here and taking all the jobs. She's still allowing the negative view to continue in this conversation. So an ally stands up for what is right. An ally's perspective is not necessarily what is right. And that's very true. And I want to thank everybody again for participating. I'm sorry I had to rush through the last part of this. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.